All right, in studio with us today is Kevin von Keyserling, the CEO of ReadySet Surgical. And today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, the impact on the supply chain management side of the healthcare equation. We'll be talking about loaners and implants and everything that's mixed up into that, Kevin. So thank you for coming on the show with us today.
Hank, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, for folks who don't know you, what's your clinical background? What's your healthcare background? How did you get into the role that you have today?
That's a great question, Hank. I'm kind of a neophyte in the healthcare industry. My familiarity with it started at my previous company. I co-founded a cybersecurity company called KeyFactor. And KeyFactor did a lot of work in working with the healthcare industry. So if you think about medical device manufacturers who are making the next generation pacemaker, for example. How do I secure the information, the data on the pacemaker, the identity it's associated with? And then how do I transmit data safely between the pacemaker, the phone, the caregiver, and back? And that had a lot of government implications with the FDA and how do you update firmware and so forth. So I kind of got involved in healthcare through a security angle, cybersecurity orientation. And I didn't realize how much that would help me when I joined ReadySet. So it's funny how the life takes you through little twists and turns and you end up over in a place you weren't expecting.
Well, that's great. That expertise background obviously going to come up a little bit in questions around privacy and around cybersecurity and everything in the conversations today. And that pacemaker conversation, not to get us off track, but that's always been a really curious one to me because, you got data going forth inside and outside someone's body. And, there's all kinds of potential implications of that in today's world. So
it's funny when I first looked at the problem, it was, kind of made famous by Dick Cheney, the vice president, who had a pacemaker and they decided to turn off the Wi-Fi. And so, the industry started thinking about it through the angle of like, oh, wow, you could use it to assassinate somebody. But what they were more concerned about was everybody who has this brand of pacemaker that's been put in, there's a nation state attack from, like, say, North Korea, and they turn off every pacemaker, every model with it. And so it's not just one person, it's the entire install base. So a little scary.
Yeah. Well, there's other scary things that can happen in healthcare with security, and we'll get into some of that here later.
Indeed.
But before we do, let's talk a little bit about the ReadySet story. So we heard about your background coming in here from the cybersecurity side of things. Where does ReadySet sit in the context of the challenges that are facing healthcare today?
Yeah, so ReadySet, simply it's a software platform for supply chain for the healthcare industry. And what we're really focused on is making sure from the time a surgery is scheduled, from the time it's booked, how do we get all the information about that case to all the pertinent parties that are going to be involved in supporting the case, including the OEM. So we want to be able to say, hey, I have a patient that's coming in 3 weeks from now for a knee replacement, and I'm going to give you all the pertinent biometric information in a secure way so that the OEM then can assemble the trays, get the right size medical implants to the hospital on time, get it through sterilization, and into OR for first cut. So we want to make sure that all flows very smoothly. And then after the surgery is done, we want to handle all the financial reconciliation to make sure that the hospital is paying exactly what they should pay and the information going off to the payer is correct so that all the financial reconciliation can happen in a timely manner. And then the last thing we're trying to do is make sure that we notify the OEM that the surgery and everything has been completed and their equipment and the implants are now ready to be picked up from the hospital so that essentially the SPD doesn't become another warehouse for the OEM.
Right. Yeah. So you got a communication piece there. You got a finance piece, you got a logistics piece, and I'm sure there's some other pieces categorically we can put in there.
But you got all the right buckets, Hank. Those are the right buckets.
Yeah. So, overlaying or maybe undergirding all of that is this discussion around artificial intelligence. Is probably one of the hottest conversations in the world today, not just within healthcare, but it's a buzzword these days in healthcare. A lot of technologies, throwing it around and saying, hey, we're AI powered or utilizing AI. what does that mean specifically in the context for these ReadySet solutions that you just laid out?
It's funny, Hank. AI reminds me a little bit of the hype cycle that we had for blockchain, 5 to 7 years ago. Everything had to be a blockchain. And, looking at that past experience and navigating that in my previous life, I thought, how do we apply artificial intelligence, AI, in a practical way at ReadySet? And so we started off with just some early, easy things to do. And so one of the things I asked all the coworkers at ReadySet to do was to spend 1 hour a day using AI to better help you perform your job. So we did some resourcing. We said, okay, we're going to bring in Microsoft Copilot. That's kind of Chat GPT customized for the Microsoft Office environment. And then there's Google's Gemini, and even Twitter, or now X, has Grok. And you can download those apps and put them on your phone. And so what we really just try to get everybody functionally aligned in their role to say, how can I use AI to better perform my job? So if you think, hey, I'm in marketing, I don't have anything to do with building supply chain software, how does that make a difference to me? It's like, well, can I use AI to help me do market research? Can I understand how many orthopedic surgeries are being performed in this region of the country by which device manufacturers? And AI actually does a really good job at helping you source and do that type of research. Obviously, we're using it to help write better code. And then we're thinking of practical ways to apply it within our software and within the hospital, as well as on the backside with the OEM. But in the biggest advice I'd give to anyone looking at AI is start just using it in your personal life. Get the ChatGPT app, download it on your phone. If you like using Twitter or X, download the Grok app or click on it and start using it for practical things in your life. It was funny. I was doing a little planning for my kids, and my wife and I are going to go to Chicago over the winter break. And I'm like, all right, help me find a hotel. Hey, we want to go see this game or this venue. Help me find the tickets for this many people. And it's amazing at how well it does just easy, practical things. And it just streamlines and frees up time for you. Now, I will say the other thing that you learn to do with AI when you start to use it practically is AI will hallucinate. It will make up facts or information and data, bring and put it forward as though this is the way it is. This is the truth. This is the case. And it's anything but the case. And so, that's where the human intelligence has to come in and say, hey, does that make sense? Is that logical? I need to double check that to make sure that's correct. So you have to have some backstops for it. And the more that people use it and get familiar with it, the more sense it makes of where you can apply it in your everyday work life.
I love that internal vision, that you cast for the team that says, hey, if we're going to be selling these AI powered solutions or, AI impacted solutions, maybe that's a better descriptor there. But if we're going to be doing that, we need to be pretty competent and confident in our own use of AI and other applications. So, that's a pretty consistent vision there. Really appreciate that. On the side of the supply chain leader in healthcare, I think this, but healthcare doesn't really like change too much. Yeah. I think we like the concept of change. We don't really like it itself. And AI is changing things. So from that supply chain leadership perspective, can you speak to some of the changes or maybe what's possible today? Like you listed a lot of what I would categorize as kind of consumer AI applications, like, right? Tell me to write better emails, help me to map out my vacation that's coming, like help me to do some marketing stuff, right? But on the supply chain leadership side of things, there's all kinds of fun, creative things that are already out there for the taking. Would you speak to a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. So I think about AI kind of like a freshman going into college, right? So your freshman year, you have your level 101 courses that you want to have your base foundation for the major you're studying. And your sophomore year, you go to the 201, and your junior 301. And by your senior year at 401, and if you're in engineering, you have a fifth year, right? You're now like in your master's class work for AI. And so when we look at how do we apply it in the supply chain and practically within the software, we really do start with how can we do it for everyday tasks that are administratively burdensome, that can be enhanced with some automation. Right? So we start thinking and applying it that way. Then we're looking for what are the practical applications for AI in healthcare that are reasonably safe for us to start to work with. I'll give you an example that when we do a new software update, we're going to add new features and functionality to the software. And because we're a kind of a B2B SaaS platform, or that's kind of like my jargon, but business to business software as a service model, right? So we're updating these in the cloud. And when we do that, we want to make sure that we're making it very easy for the hospital to deploy our software so that it's efficient and it's easy to use and it doesn't create any hiccups. So with that, we started thinking about, okay, when we enhance our software, we add new features and new functions. Many times, the hospital will benefit or want to update their policies for giving instructions to the vendor or the OEM on, hey, these are the types of trays that we will accept. They're going to be accepted in receiving. We want to weigh those trays to make sure they're not more than 25 pounds. We want to inspect and take a picture of the tray before it comes in. And so you think about all of those things are kind of intuitively obvious of why the hospital might want to do that. But to make it practical, then they have to update their policy manual and they have to inform their vendors of the new policies. And it turns out AI with the large learning models is very good at going through and saying, okay, here's the feature set. What policies within the hospital should likely be updated? And can you write sample templates of those new policies to help expedite it and get it through the process and add it to the way the hospital operates? And so for us, it's kind of it's an early, easy way to get started with it. It takes a headache out of the cycle. And while it's not very sexy today, it's a nice way to get started with the process. Now, there's things that are going to come here in the future that they're going to be game changing for healthcare and how we do it in AI. So you think about being able to go through and produce medicines faster because we can now sequence every single protein known to humankind. All of those things are happening at a research level, and it's going to start working its way into the supply chain, but it's going to take time. We're a few years off from some of the vision of what AI can do to becoming practical and being embedded within the healthcare system. But from where I sit, I like to think about what are the early things we can start to do to test it, make sure we understand it. And then, importantly, when you're working in healthcare, safety and the security of that data and that information is of paramount importance. So start early with it, get familiar with it, start to understand what those implications are, so that as we get closer to some of these game-changing things that will come down the road for us, that we're prepared to address it and leverage it within our own hospital, within our own hospital system.
Right. I love that example, though, on the impact and the implications of a policy change, for instance, or an update, to the new features, and how easy it can be in healthcare, like across health systems, to miss that implication in your policies and procedures and compliance manuals. And at scale, to have a tool like AI that can say, this is where all the policies that reference this, old way that we used to do this, and here's the new way, and here's the language that you need to update. And it just does it at the flip of a switch. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And that's just one example. Right?
Yeah. And if you think about it, it really frees up time for you to do the things that really matter, that are really super important around producing better healthcare outcomes from the patient. And I think that AI will be applied that way. And we'll start to see the impact of that 5 to 7 years down the road with real data sets that can show that this isn't just hype. It's actually making a difference in humans' lives. The outcomes are better and more predictable. So I think it's important today to get that foundation right and to start getting the familiarity with it. And there's no better way than to start using it in your own personal life to start to feel comfortable with it today.
Well, that comfort comment is a good segue to take us back to the comment that you made about hallucinations within AI. And, it's just one kind of side example, but to highlight some of the potential mistrust of handing over so much of this process within healthcare to computers that, some people inherently are like, I don't know, because we've built these processes around, but, humans historically, and the institutional knowledge and the experience that only humans can have in making updates or policy recommendations and whatnot. And so how do we navigate the potential for hallucinations that AI has out there? That kind of lack of distrust again at the early adopter, just not the early adopter stage, the other end of that adoption curve, for folks who are just more, I'm not sure that I'm ready for that, but AI is coming.
Yep.
So somehow we've got to get sure. So how do we get there?
Yeah. And part of it is thinking about is there a way that you can educate yourself on what are the trends in AI specific to your role within the hospital that you're doing? And there's a lot of AI communities now for different folks that they can go sign up, participate in online, watch, see what's going on, join the chat boards, understand what's happening in a practical way. And then a lot of hospitals, IDN systems today have begun task force on how can we apply AI to make our hospital more efficient, produce better outcomes. And for those that have an interest in those, I highly recommend signing up for your local IDN where you work. If there's not a task force or a committee on it today, there will be. And if you have the ability to sign up and participate in that task force, you should. And then look for projects that are easy to get started on with low risk, where you don't have to think about some of the things that can create a liability for the hospital or the system that weren't intended at the time. So I put a lot of thought into saying, hey, let's make sure that when we start to work with AI, we're not going to use any personal identifiable information about a patient, that there's no way that the LOM is actually going to get pointed at a data set that contains that type of information. So how do I put up those boundaries around that? How do I do a security review for AI? And how do I think through that process and the implications of it? A lot of the same principles still apply, but it's making sure that I apply those principles through an AI lens.
So let's talk data. In the healthcare supply chain world, for many years now, the saying has been, hey, it's not that we don't have enough data, it's that we actually have too much data. Yeah. And we don't have enough time to figure out what does all this mean. Clearly, AI is a massive tool to better visualize, but then also to make all kinds of recommendations on what actions you should potentially take on this data. So how does the ReadySet AI integration in this abundance of supply chain data, how is that working together to make this patient care better?
Yeah, so when we think about the next step of where can we move with AI within our platform, within the healthcare space and industry, we're thinking a lot about how can we build a little assistant. Can we have an AI assistant in your platform so that when you open up your screen in the morning and say, okay, here's my dashboard, here's what's coming in, here's what I need to be aware of, what functions can be automated with an assistant, where you can literally just say to it, like, hey, can you schedule this? We've got a surgery coming up at 2:00. Let's make sure that we have these trays processed through the system in there. And could you give me a reminder on this? And then you get notice there's a trauma case coming in. And everything that you just had planned is now off kilter. So can you use an assistant and say, okay, give me the best way to reroute my day to get this trauma case handled and all the other cases we had scheduled processed. So we're thinking a lot about that, of having a little assistant that can help, from the SPD manager to the VP of supply chain to the OR nurse. What are the areas that we can touch by helping to automate, make a little assistant take care of trivial tasks that you can now automate in a much more intelligent way.
So let's talk security threats. We were talking off topic at the beginning about security threats with pacemakers. Let's get on topic here with security threats specific, to this kind of information. And I know you just mentioned, hey, if you're just getting started, kind of getting your toes in the water, start with these low risk, kind of categories where there's no patient information, there's no identification, but we're still dealing with this kind of data information on a daily basis. There's still threats. We see it on the news every single week almost that somebody else got hit with some kind of cyber attack. How do we approach this, or what threats should we be aware of in navigating this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's critical that if you're going to deploy AI within an IDN, a healthcare system, that you have a well thought out plan of where we're going to deploy it, and what are all the security ramifications around it. And when you're starting at that level 101, remember we're going from level 101 to 401, start thinking about the map of, okay, let's make sure in my first data sets that I'm going to train it on for this type of application in the hospital, that I've guarded. I've got good, solid guardrails around any type of patient identifiable information. How can I scrub that data? How can I obfuscate that information so that I don't unintentionally expose it or put the hospital or the patient at risk? So I'll give you a practical example of something that we're thinking through today. When we speak with our OEMs, so the people that are making the medical device, and we talk to them about getting the right implant to the hospital on time and through the OR so that it flows seamlessly. What the almost all the OEMs have told us, the more biometric information that you can give us about the patient, the better we can size the tray. Well, now we're getting into that patient identifiable information. So how do we obfuscate the patient's name or anything that would identify him through this procedure, and yet let the OEM know the information that they need to have? So the golden mantra here is what we'd eventually love to be able to do is to send the radiological images for a procedure to the OEM. Then they could really size the implants and produce the trays in a much more efficient way. So what the kind of the golden rule in supply chain as it relates to the topic we're on is, can I bring down the tray count, right? So can I, rather than bringing in 18 trays for a procedure, can I bring in 4 trays for a procedure? And if you can provide the right biometrics with the radiological images in a secure channel, the efficiency that the SPD can gain, the hospital can gain, and the OEM, it's a full circle win-win-win. But you have to think about what's the information in a very innocent activity, right? Hey, I just want to give these biometrics about this case to this OEM so that we can have a better outcome. Makes a ton of sense. You have to think through all the little tiny pieces of the I gotchas. And AI can make that process very easy. They can automate that process. They can help package that process. They can give you all the things that you need to act on in that process. But you have to make sure that you're thinking through, how am I encrypting that data at rest, in transit, and then how am I storing it eventually offline or in a database, even if it's in the cloud, that it's obfuscated so nobody else can read that data.
So, knowing your background in cybersecurity, I've got a fun question here for you, because we're utilizing AI to help us to encrypt our data, to put up those security measures. Can't someone else use AI to undo what we're using AI to do? And it's just the battle of AIs.
It's an interesting question. And for me, it's a fun conversation to have with my buddies over beers. Like, what are all the other things that can go wrong? And, how many AI models do we want to have? And so you've got ChatGPT with OpenAI, that's a huge player in the space. They've led the way. You've got Google with Gemini. You've got Elon Musk with Twitter, X, and Grok. And you've got all kinds of other AIs out there, from taking text to image or image to text and going back and forth. So it can be very nuanced with all the different folks. I think it's very healthy to have an ecosystem with all those different players at the table, because they're all going to have slightly different cuts on it. They're all going to think about, how do I protect data, and how do I train it, and how do I keep bad things from happening? What are the AI principles that we should have in place to keep the human population safe? It's not a zero chance that AI behaves badly at some point and ends us. That is, a little bit of science fiction. I think it's a very unlikely scenario. I think it's more likely that we're going to get a utopian outcome, but it's not locked in. But I do like the fact that we have our best and brightest minds in the country working on it, thinking about it, and building out these models. And the other piece of it is we really don't have a choice, right? If we don't invest in that in the United States, our adversaries will. Other countries will put that time and effort into it. And we have more control if it's being developed in the United States, where we have some governance and regulation that we can bring to bear in oversight. I feel more confident in our outcome of getting it right with all the different players that we have involved.
Yeah, we were just watching the latest Mission Impossible the other night, just talking about how, Tom Cruise is 60 and he's still acting like he's 20 something in those movies. But that's another topic.
I watched him at the Olympics. I thought that was a great way to wrap it up.
Yeah, no, I didn't even see that. But the Mission Impossible piece on the cybersecurity, like obviously, there's espionage at play and there's implications around that, as you said, government, like there's government vested interests. But, bringing it back around to a comment that you made about the OEMs, I'm curious the impact that you see, because you sit in a very unique position in this conversation, is you got OEMs on this side that, need this kind of information to serve patients better. We're just talking about the biometrics. You got the hospitals and IDNs. You got within the hospital, you got the customers in the OR. You got the sterile processing team. You got the supply chain team that's looking at the financial piece of this as well. But on the OEM side of the equation, where do you see a greater potential for those teams to utilize this kind of technology, or even partnerships with ReadySet to take what they're doing beyond the status quo and maybe that human build process they've been doing for the last couple of decades? What's the next step for them?
Oh, Hank, that's a great question. We sit at a very interesting intersection. In many ways, I think of ReadySet as almost a middleware. Right? We connect the administrative systems in a hospital with the clinical systems in a hospital. And then we connect it with the OEM that's providing the surgical supplies to the hospital. And then ultimately they're going into the patient. So one of the things that is emerging right now because of LLM and AI is who actually owns the data. And so when you look at the OEM, so they all believe that it's my pacemaker. I own all the biometric data that pacemaker is collecting. Now, if you go over to the hospital, to the IDN, the care team thinks, no, we own that data. We did the surgery. That's our data. And then you've got the government, right? The FDA says, oh, no, that's our data. We want to know that, not you. And then ultimately, right, it's really the patient's data. It's theirs. They own that. And they have to decide, do they want to share that? Do they want to participate in that study? Is it worth me sharing that information because I'm going to get a better patient outcome by participating in this type of care package or this type of study? But it's an unresolved question right now in the industry. And if you look at the next evolution of AI, of where it's going to go, the ownership of who owns the data is a very interesting problem that's yet to be solved.
Yeah. That data piece, I think, is even on something as small, like you kind of mentioned graphic generation through AI, and now you've got like all of these graphics have been generated on these websites, on Grok and other places. And who owns that? Is it open source? Is it the creator who generated it? But obviously it's Grok that generated it through the prompt. So just something as simple as that highlights now off to the complexity of this patient information, these device information. I mean, definitely a deep question. And,
it's kind of, I think it's like a microcosm, right? So if you think about some of the lawsuits that are going on right now with the newspapers, the media outlets, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and they're saying, hey, ChatGPT, you don't get to use that. That's my data. It's copyrighted. I own that data. You cannot train your LLM on it. So in a sense, this is just a microcosm of that bigger problem in a very confined environment.
So I got one last question here on the implementation piece, and then we'll kind of go to next steps for the audience today. But clearly, any technology that's being purchased and brought into the healthcare system, there's always, if an IDN is convinced, hey, this can help us, there's high expectations, right? They purchased this, they said, whatever this is promising, that's what we want. Then comes the implementation phase. And we also all know that in the implementation phase, so many of these promises just die on the vine or get strung out and, blow up in our faces. And so how can this AI conversation today help drive effective implementation, sustained implementation, so everyone gets what they want, right? On the service provider side, they want the implementation to go well too, and so does the idea. And so everybody wants this, but so many times we don't get it. How can this help?
Yeah, I think and it sounds boring, and I wish I had a more exciting answer for it. But where most IT initiatives in new technology that you want to apply fails is everybody builds this great vision of what it can be, and they develop a boil the ocean strategy. So we're going to do all of this at once, and you try to tackle the world. It almost invariably fails. And so thinking about small practical ways that you can control the environment, test the environment, make sure you can expect the outcomes, go back and test it again, make sure you didn't have a hallucination problem with the data set, right? Going through all of that, but keeping it very confined. So put up tight guardrails, make sure that you're not crossing over those guardrails. And then once you've got that foundation tested, you feel solid with it, then go to expand, right? So, and again, we're not going to boil the ocean. We're not even leaving the channel yet, right? We're still in the safety of the harbor. So before we go out to sea, we want to make sure that the ship is tested and buttoned up before we try to pull that off. And do it in small testable phases is my best advice.
Right. And that's true. It's just not what folks want to hear, right? They want to flip the switch and they want to solve the problems tomorrow. And yeah, so many times they flip the switch and then it's just like, this is not working. Yeah. And everything's not being solved today. So I think that's just terrific.
Yeah, when you flip the switch on a big, large boil the ocean project, right? Think of the billions of things that can go wrong. And we're in our space, in our industry, there's usually, it sounds grandiose, but there's people's lives at stake. And we want to make sure that we get this absolutely right so that we don't put people's lives at stake. And while it's very tempting to rush out there and jump in the middle of the ocean with this, better to make sure that we have everything buttoned up correctly in port before we set out to sea.
I said that I had one last question, but I'm going to ask you one more question before the last question here, because I'm thinking about my IT teams in my healthcare facilities. And so many times, the clinicians, even the C-suite, they get excited about these solutions. They know they can work. They know it's what they need. You bring them to IT, and then IT has all of these roadblocks and all of this pushback. Do you have any advice on navigating that initial, because they are the ones who have been burned so many times by the question that we're just talking about, and they've heard all the promises and they've seen all the technology many times, even if they haven't seen the specific technology that's being brought to them, it's not necessarily new to them, right? And so the temptation is kind of to put up roadblocks, and then if you're lucky enough or skillful enough as a clinician leader to get through all the roadblocks, and maybe you'll get your technology approved through IT. Any other advice that seems to work from your perspective to navigate those?
Yeah, I've been through this journey many times, and I certainly can relate to the IT team at the IDN. They're understaffed. They're not resourced like they should be. Things that they would love to do better and be more proactive about, they can't because they just don't have the wherewithal, the financial resources to make that happen. But one thing that I have found that does work is get your IT steering committee involved early in the process. the more a part of the project they are from the beginning of the thought, beginning of the vision, the more likely it is to have a successful outcome. And they can begin thinking about, okay, how would I staff this? How would I resource it? What's the implementation timeline look like? Let's get security addressed up front, not at the very last minute. I mean, that's where a lot of these things fail. It's like nobody thought about looking at the security until they're about to flip it live and go into production. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. You want secure by design, not secure after the fact by remediation. That's the wrong way to do this.
All right, Kevin. So there's going to be all kinds of different folks that are tuning into this conversation: supply chain leaders, sterile processing managers, perioperative directors, surgeons, OEMs, vendor representatives who are like, what are y'all trying to solve for me out there? Let me make sure that I know what's going on. If they want to know more, if they want to get, self-educate around the AI piece, if they want to know more about ReadySet, if they just want to connect with you, maybe bounce some more questions off you, what's the best next step forward for them?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for more information out there, there's great resources on the web that can give you guidelines, how-tos, where to get started with it. We certainly have some of those resources on our website that we try to make available. And we're trying to publish the latest guidance and white papers on the topic as well. And folks are always welcome to connect directly with me. I'm on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I connect with folks, and I try to stay as engaged as possible on it. I may be a little lax sometimes in responding in a timely manner, but I eventually get to it.
We need to get you an AI assistant that can automate some of those responses for you there.
I was dreaming about that the other night when I was trying to go through all my LinkedIn email. I'm like, I need an AI assistant just to manage LinkedIn for me.
That's right, just to prioritize. Well, Kevin, terrific conversation today. We covered a lot of ground. Obviously, there's a lot more to cover. And as we've alluded to, this problem and these solutions are changing every day, overnight. There's new products coming to market. There's new angles. There's new concerns. And so I think the message here is pay attention, get comfortable, and buckle up, because it's going to be an exciting ride the next 5 to 10 years.
Hank, that is a terrific summary. Thank you. I really enjoyed my time today. Great discussion.